Welcome, everybody. How y'all doing today? All right. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of y'all day. I really appreciate it. I got my man Reggie Browne here. We're going to talk some art. We're coming up on a year in this space, and we've hosted a number of programs, a number of exhibitions, and many of you have been a big part of Baya's growth over the last 13 years. Reggie has been there from the beginning. I want to acknowledge, for those that have been following us on this 13-year journey, actually 13 years as of May 1st is when we launched. Many of you remember the old Ning website, you know, the conversations and the postings and us kind of growing into our own over time. Well, Reggie was one of the first collectors that we had featured on the front cover. He was very active at that time, and he's always been an instrumental part and a supportive part of Baya and myself. So without patrons and supporters like Reggie, things like this doesn't happen. And many of you that are in the audience right now who have supported Baya through showing up at shows, collecting work, telling your friends and families about what we're doing, being present, you know, you've all played a part in what we're doing and what we're building here. So I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to our staff, who, without them, none of this would be possible. Thank you to Satiri, my wife for 28 years. I always got to thank her, right? How she puts up with me, I have no idea. But I'm living a truly blessed life. But I want to share with you, I think there's a lot of wisdom that we can gain from a good brother like Reggie, who's been in the trenches collecting and supporting artists and institutions for a number of years. So let me just read a little bio. Natasha, come on, our VIP collectors and Baya supporters, we got you reserved right there. Thank you. You know, we got to save a little special spot to the people that help pay the bills. I'm sorry, right? All right. So just a quick bio. Reggie, committed collector, philanthropist, globally respected and sought after financial professional. I mean, I've seen him on Bloomberg and all these other channels. But most known for collecting and his love and passion for art. He's the vice chair of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, chairman of the Creative Capital Foundation. Reggie served as a trustee of PAFA since 2015, and 2001 was elected as an officer to the board. He's a vice chair. He and his wife are avid collectors and supporters of African American art and the whole ecosystem. So if you would, let's welcome Reggie to Black Art in America.
Thank you.
All right. So I've got a list of questions, but I want this just to be more conversational. You know, Reggie's my man. He's a good friend. I want to talk about Reggie as a supporter. You know, not only was he present on Baya and the website, but he's also facilitated us going to and doing shows at his home, the quote unquote home show. Many gallerists and artists are supported that way. He's shown up at the different fairs or boutique fairs that we produce in like Houston, being on panels and supporting that way as well, in Philly and so on and so forth. So I want to just thank you again for being there, acquiring work, being present, being counsel for us. So yeah, I want to say that to Reggie. Now, I get into my questions.
Well, look, I think first of all,
Okay.
you know, I'm a little tired. I've been traveling. It's been a season of traveling for the last couple of weeks. I was in Houston Thursday and flew home to New York for dinner last night. Dred Scott, he's an artist. He had an opening, and he is a Creative Capital awardee in 2001. I wanted to go and shake his hand and support him, and then got home and flew down to be with Najee. And one thing about the home shows, once you let this brother in, he won't leave. So be careful what you ask for, particularly with him. But I appreciate the warm greetings. I was here, I think a few months ago. I woke him up, he was all grumpy. I took a tour and shook his hand for this beautiful edifice and allowed him to express his views around African American art. And I encourage him to be a leader in this community, and he is doing that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Reggie. Can y'all hear me okay? I project okay? So, because I hear a little squeal with the mic, so I want to I'm gonna let mine down. You can use yours, okay? Reggie, did you grow up with art in your home as a child? And where did you grow up at?
So did I grow up with art in my home? The answer is yes. My father was in the military, and I grew partially up in Jersey at McGuire Air Force Base. And then my parents divorced and finished up where I went to high school in Philadelphia, but born and bred in Philadelphia. And my parents, I was born in '68. And in that time period, it was all about identity art. And so I grew up on an Air Force base. On the top of a television, there was a Don Miller reproduction lithograph of an African woman breastfeeding a child. And I stared at this thing for 10 years. And my uncle was an air traffic controller in New York, and he was fired by President Reagan. And so I'm giving you like the time period. And between my father and my uncle would go to the Met, and he had posters of Nefertiti and all this stuff, and he was cultured, and he was a cool cat. And so when I got thrown out of my house, my mama showed me the door at 19 because I know how to act. And I decided to go to the museums, and I bought a couple posters in our frame. I think I was somebody doing something. And that started the journey of webbing my appetite about trying to understand art. And I had different inflection points along the way. And some of them were pretty significant inflection points. But that's how I started. And I can't end this story by not saying my family. My grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, born in 1900, they were real estate owners in the 1930s. So for people of color in Philadelphia owning real estate, that said something. They were savers, and they believed in financial well-being. And then my grandmother was a Avon district manager in the 70s. And the way Philadelphia was organized, you had black folks started in South Philly, then went to West Philly, and went to Mount Airy. Mount Airy was the first integrated neighborhood in the United States. And they bought a home in 1970. I was 2. I just told y'all my age. And so through that, it was really the gift of living well and living below your means. That was a common statement in all of our homes. And art was a part of it. And I'm a beneficiary of just that ecosystem. My grandfather was the first wave of black firemen in Philadelphia. So a lot of firsts. And because of that, I was exposed. And we're working class people. I'm not going to kid you. You got some people talk about, a great, and they did all this. They worked hard. And they made sure that we had enough to go around.
Yeah.
So that was my foundation.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on your professional career, but can you just talk briefly about just a snippet of what you do, if you don't mind sharing that part of your life?
Sure. So, by the way, anything that you splice up to the internet, I need editorial control. You need to make sure that I sign off on this.
Right.
But again, my grandmother, my mom worked at a retail bank. My dad was in the Air Force. And my grandmother, again, she would watch Wall Street Week, Louis Rukeyser, you want to remember that, on PBS. And occasionally when I was at her house on the Friday nights, she would sit me down and talk about the benefits of buying stocks. And I started to try to buy stock. I was interested, and she would talk to me about it. And she gave me Money Magazine for, I think, my 11th to 12th Christmas gift, years old. And that started the idea. And I was trying to buy stocks at 12, and my mom found out and shut me down. And I'm an Eagle Scout. And through Scouts, when I made Eagle Scout, they said, "What do you want to do?" I wrote stockbroker. And I got a summer job at the Philadelphia Stock Exchange when I was 15, and I never left. So that started my journey. So I manufacture and trade and sell exchange-traded funds. There are mutual funds that trade on the stock exchange. All y'all should own some of your portfolio. If you don't, we can talk. I'll point you to some resources. My frat brother is, I got frat brothers all over the place, all doing wonderful things, and they can help you. But so exchange-traded funds, ETFs, is what I do, and I was one of the first in the industry, and I helped build that industry into what it is today, which is 12,000 ETFs around the world. It's about $9 trillion in assets. At one point, I controlled 40% of them on the New York Stock Exchange, and I run a business outside in New York, trading exchange-traded funds. When you appear onto CNBC, you see guys in blue jackets. That's my firm, and that's what I control.
Does being in the financial sector, has it had an impact on how you look at art at all?
It's an asset class. My art portfolio, I think, has returned 15x to my original investment. And so when you look, and I've had some amazing stories, some incredible misses from being stubborn and then being conservative. And I'll give you one. One of the things I missed, I'll give you two. I won't say the artist or the second one because she's still practicing. And so I have three dealers. Najee's one of them. Richard Beavers in New York is the second. And Martise in Baltimore is the third. So those are my dealers that I exclusively deal with. Richard had an artist that he begged me to buy. And I said, I really don't like it. And he says to me, by the time you get around to liking it, it'll be too expensive for you to want to buy it. He was right. Yep. This artist, I could have bought it for $7,500, and she just had an auction in Europe for $319,000. Yeah. So when you think about art, you need to have money in the bank, a paid off mortgage, no credit cards, a stock portfolio, your kids' education paid off, and then there's art. So probably not in order, but art is somewhere down the line. But it's a significant investment if you put the intention of education or scholarship into it, and then understand the aesthetic and what appeals to you, and then think about the artist's career and her canon, and all of a sudden you may have something going on. So my second glaring miss, you guys know Barclay Hendricks? Barclay? Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I collect Philadelphia artists. I co-host an event every summer on Martha's Vineyard where I have a conversation. And in 2015, 16,
around there,
I had Barclay Hendricks at my house. He was on Martha's Vineyard. We did a conversation with him. We didn't tape it. He was his authentic self of just being colorful in language. And he walked around, asked me about my collection, and I could have bought Jack and Jill of Harlem had an auction at someone's house as a fundraiser, and there was a Barclay Hendricks on the wall for sale. And a friend of mine said she should go and buy it, and I was like, I don't know. This is when I was being sensible and conservative. The object was $225,000, and I was like, all right, I'm not gonna do that. Right now it's $5 million if you want to buy one. So I have iterations of stories upon stories upon stories around wherever I was in my mindset, up or down. I've had some wins. I had it right. I had some misses where I should have and I didn't. And then I did some and I should not have. So, but everything I have, I can tell a story. And then for me, art is like you get a feeling when you see something, like it's intimacy. And I won't go down this road because it's being recorded, and my wife will see it, and she'll talk to me about sneaking stuff in the house because I always do. But when you see something and you have a instant relationship with an object, you kind of know that it's responding to you. So I've had several of those moments. And I've only deaccessioned one object in my collection, and that was for a specific reason. It needed to belong into a public collection, and I did that. And then, funny enough, I had dinner last night with a curator, and she's like, I have a show up of black objects. I emptied the museum, I have black objects in the museum. And I said, give me a list of who you're displaying, and that's the object I just deaccessioned. Yeah, I had a hard time dinner last night. Yeah, I showed her the condition report, I gave her the story, I told her why I did it, and I had a hard time at dinner actually telling me about the object that she borrowed from Art Bridges, which is Crystal Bridges. They have a lot of stuff. So I'm just talking here because now you'd be talking, and I'm starting to line it up.
Please.
But literally, I think from the perspective of back to your original question, as an investment, sometimes if you stretch and you understand the artist's career and his trajectory, there could be a financial payoff. But remember, art is illiquid. You can't readily transact to raise capital, although if you get it right, you can, and that there's always fees to transact, like a bank. So if you understand that, there's been a number of objects in homes of octarians and people who were older that started collecting back in the 50s and 60s, and now they're starting to release, or their family is starting to release things. And it's just amazing, just the stories about how it got acquired, what was the original price, and what's the price right now.
That's right.
So that's all part of it. So that's my financial sense, and that's how I think about art and art investing.
Well, you're not alone in some of those misses, because as much as the times that we have gotten it right with collecting artists and pushing artists to some of the collectors that we want, there are times when I miss too. And the same artist you're talking about that Richard talked to you about is the same artist I had the same access to, and another one was Nathaniel married Quinn. Richard introduced Nathaniel married Quinn to me when his price points were $10,000 to $15,000, right, for an original. Now, Gauguin with $500,000.
First of all, I want to say hello to my fellow Boulay. What's up, Archon? All right, nice to see you.
Right.
I figured you would show up here. Not for this audience only. Is to be cut from anything that you put. This is not being live streamed, is it?
No, it's not live streamed.
So I was in Nathaniel's living room. I was at Swiss Beats No Commission Art Fair in the Bronx, 16, 17. And I turned a corner, I was like, what's that? And instantly I was gravitated towards it. And I was like, I want to know who that is. And the person that would show me around knew them, and I ended up in their living room in Brooklyn, drinking champagne with a checkbook. And I said, how much? And he was like, 19 grand, but he said, I got you. This is Nathaniel Curran. I got you. I said, no, I'll give you right now the 19,000 you want. I want one. He's like, and then I go back to him and said, can we transact? He's like, I didn't promise you that. And I was like, come on, man. I was in your living room. I was talking to your wife, Donna. His work is now $350,000 or higher. And his work is actually, I just went to Spelman and I saw that show. First time on Spelman's campus, just so you know. I was amazed. Believe it or not. Been to Atlanta 1,000 times, never crossed tracks. And it's a great show. And Nathaniel is in that exposition, and the curator has done a phenomenal job of weaving together a narrative that's consistent and is robust. Is the curator here by any chance? Is Cheryl Finley part of that? I'm not sure.
Liz is the curator, and Cheryl has been the director of the AUC.
AUC. Yeah, she's my neighbor on Martha's Vineyard, but I wasn't sure if she had a hand in that because I saw pictures. But yeah, so Nathaniel's in there.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the show at Spelman, it's a must-see. It's a must-do. Please go and see that. Want to welcome everybody else that just arrived. Now, Reggie, you've lent a number of pieces out to institutions. before we talk about why you do that and the advantages of lending work to museums for the collector and as well as for the artist, can you just run through some of the artists in your collection, just to give them a sense?
Sure. 19th century would be a tanner. I would have a tanner. It could be a banister in there, potentially. 20th century, I would highlight Huey Lee Smith, Elizabeth Catlett. I had two. Now just one. Who else? Someone that I'm really strongly passionate about, Mo Brooker out of Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, we're working with the family to try to deepen his market after he died 2 years ago. Contemporary artists would be Alfred Conte and Najee. So I have work by Najee, Alfred Conte that Najee encouraged me to, he was right, to acquire. Titus Kaffar, and it's a big object. That's going out to loan to National Portrait Gallery of London, I think for 5 years. I don't know why I agreed to that, but 5 years. Artist that Joshua Klaus, that he's just doing one of these numbers here. I have a long list, and it really comes down to body of work, the story behind it, how I feel about the scholarship around it, and then if the object reaches a certain level, what I feel about locking money up for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So what about to the museums? Like, what is that for you with lending the work to the institutions?
So Didier Williams is a Yale MFA. He is he's affiliate with Rutgers. He was the MFA chair at Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He just had a mid-career retrospective at the North Miami Museum in Miami, his hometown, and the object just arrived back to my home 2 days ago in a crate, sitting in the middle of the living room while I'm getting yelled at why it's there. It's important, and then Bob Thompson, I just lent that out. With the Level is on a show now. I think he is now in Virginia, if I have that correct. So a bunch of curators have an idea what I have, and if they call, I respond by saying yes. So it's important, to document your collection. And when you document your collection, you document it through scholarship, a book, and then an exposition. I was national co-chair of the Norman Lewis exhibit in Philadelphia, where Norman Lewis' work, before we put the show up, his work was around 50 grand. Hey, Kent, how are you, man? Nice to see you. I knew you were coming. His work was 50 grand. And then after the exposition, his work is now trading at $1.5 million. Mm-hmm. So what's important here is that our artists need to be documented in collections in museums. Need to be documented in scholarship in a book. And then it needs to be, the provenance needs to be in museums in order to create a trail of history, and that increases value. And then that leads into a story about making sure that there are curators of color at every major museum, and that because I am a vice chairman of the oldest art museum in the United States, I have a particular understanding of the field. And right now, there are 9 Black chief executives of primarily white museums in the United States. There are 33,000 museums. 33,000 museums. There are 9 Black chief officers of the museums in the United States. The 10th is like a head of state with the flashing lights and the flags and all that good stuff and the cars. Lonnie Bunch, the Smithsonian, where he oversees multiple. So he's not really a chief executive per se in this context. And I don't include the CEOs or the directors of primary Black or college museums, because the trustees are they're going to hire who they understand, right? So that's a category by himself. And so when you understand the composition of these museums, and then who's deciding the work that represents a particular narrative does not make it onto the walls because the people making decisions don't understand the narrative. And so you need to have people of color in that decision tree. And then that's starting to gain momentum, but it only started gaining momentum literally first around Norma Lewis, because you can go back and see Black artists marching into the museum. That was the title of the New York Times story. And then George Floyd. You know, everyone decided you have someone black on strap check the box. It's just like that. Now it's growing, but there's a long road to go.
Yeah. Can you talk about maybe just one or two specifics, like being in the position that you're in, the influence that you have? Are there specific things that you've been able to do related to like PAFA or any of the other institutions that you can maybe just share?
Yeah, I think I'm an influencer of policy or other things. Well, one, at the Academy of Fine Arts in Philly, we hired Eric Pryor, who was the CEO of Harlem School of Arts. He's now CEO of Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Qualified individual, and just we decided now is the time after 218 years. So I think being around a table, I partnered with Trustee's several years ago, where I recognized that young people, first of all, if my kids came in and said, I want to go to art school, I would look at them like, what did you just say to me? You know, so it's like, you know, it's a very specialized, look, I'm deep in the arts, but I'm practical and sensible too, right? And so you go to art school, like the Academy of Fine Arts, PAFA, art school costs $80,000. And you come out, either you paid 80 grand one way or another. And then you say, well, what's the job you have? Well, many of those people, they get jobs in medical administration or some sort of design, or they become entrepreneurs. Very few are working artists. But I recognize that curators who wanted to have an undergrad, an MFA, and then maybe a PhD, unless they had a sponsor, it was very difficult for them to have a professional career because they can get into the program, they can find a way to pay for it. They can't afford to live in the cities where these museums are at. So I decided to address living expenses. So I partnered with Trustee's, and we created the Trustee's Reginald Browne Education Fund, something. And then it was designed to put people of color, four in Europe, 4 in the United States, pay for living expenses to their program in order to propagate more people of color. So it's really about being intentional and then being forward-thinking and then having the right relationships to make sure that the right people who have the qualified credentials actually get the job. And so Kelly, he is a trustee at the Hyde Museum. And I have several friends across different museums. As trustees of color, we're at the table. We got to make sure not only are the collecting committees putting money behind black artists and make sure it goes in collections of museums, got to make sure the staff is representative of the communities at which it serves and that the opportunities are robust and open. And so that really wasn't the case until Thelma Golden starting to beat on the walls and others about 20 years ago. But you're talking about a landscape of 200 years, you know. Even me, I tried to get my curator of contemporary art to buy a list of black artists that you got to do it now. It didn't get done. And now the art has moved outside of the range that we're comfortable of acquiring with our budget. And so it's a missed opportunity to have representation. Yeah. So that's what you got to do.
Yeah, I've experienced that too. I remember the Columbus Museum they had got a fund from the Amos family owns Aflac to acquire more works by African American artists, and The challenge was that, like, I think there's a real lack of vision in the sense of, like, a lot of institutions want to be Me Too institutions. They see the names that are, on the walls, but those price points are beyond their scope, like what you're saying. But many of them are not identifying or really working to identify the new talent. Like, what's that next group of artists that may be artists for them to consider? Because I could take you back to email that I sent to the director in 2015 saying that you should get Amy Sherrill a show. I can pull that email up. This is when her work was 9,000, right? And extremely accessible. But there are a lot of collectors in here right now. Many collectors and a ton of artists always want to know, how do we get work into the museums? You've got a lot of collectors that's been collecting for a long, extended period of time. Many are active right now, like myself and others. Do you have any insight on, like, what do we need to be thinking about when we start to think about the legacy and where their legacy is going to go and end up?
Well, there are two tracks. Also, you asked me what names. Vaughn Spann is another guy. Gabriel Mills is another one. I love Yale MFA, abstract art. I got something for them. Something about their teaching outcomes, the learning outcomes of RISD, PAFA, Yale, MICA. I know about SCAD. Is SCAD around here? I think it's around here someplace. But I'm just being competitive. I can tell you about the learning outcomes from certain art programs I can detect. One's very colorful, one has detailed and as multi-layered, and you can just tell certain professors, and then one says you got to paint like 30 by 40. No, 30 feet by 40. And it's like, cut that out, just stop. But how to get works into institutional collections is two tracks. Volunteer your time and some of your treasures and talent at a museum collecting committee. That is one strong way of having a voice and navigating around what gets approved, what doesn't get approved. Secondarily, writing a smaller check, become friends of the institution, and make relationships with the people that are making decisions and start to influence how they're thinking. And then lastly, buying work and just donating. So that's really just writing a check and saying gift of, or promise gift of the future to this collection. And then you can go about it different ways. You can pool your money and say this is the gift from Alpha Kappa Alpha or Delta Sigma Theta, such and such chapter, and it's going to go to this museum. Or you can do Mr. and Mrs. And then depending on the object and the narrative and then the mission of the institution, that may or may not be accepted. They can still say no.
Yeah. I was thinking they definitely going to want to make sure that they want the material would be a big criteria, because
a lot of it, what you don't want. So when museums, typically they are self-insured, and then depending on their capacity for storage, their concern is having too much where they can't store it. And then storage costs come into calculations. Remember, these are non-profit institutions. And so it comes down to, one, can we house it? Now, in PAFA, we have the entire series of Jacob Lawrence Hero Roadshow series. It's on work. You don't see it maybe once every 5 years because it's fragile. But it's interesting, and we have it, but it doesn't come out. Like, I have a 47 Jacob Lawrence in my collection.
I've seen it.
You walk into my door, it's to the left, it's on the wall. Everyone says, you got to put that away from the light. I want to see it. And then a couple of curators says, we'll take it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you will. Mm-hmm. And so, that's where I am prepping my children to understand the canon that we have, why we have it, and what to do with it when I'm no longer here, and then making sure there are funds for care of the collection so they don't do things stupid that I had to come back and slap them upside their head for doing something stupid. Because there's always, the kids selling grandma's house on Martha's Vineyard because the house is now worth X, and they're time paying taxes, and that's a real story.
Yeah, I know. I was wondering if he was going to bring that Jake up, because that's the first private collection I've ever gone into and saw an original Jake. So I was like, what? Can you share a little bit about how your collection has evolved over time?
Yeah, and then that's important. I think when I started to accelerate in my career and have excess funds, I just started to, let's go buy some art. And when the financial crisis came, everyone ran out of money. The art museum had no money, people were going bankrupt, and because the world was going crazy, and I'm a market maker, you know, my cash pile was going up because I make money when people do dumb things in the stock market. And so that was a period where there's a lot of volatility, and volatility is my friend. And so that's when I started to go out and I was buying Black Masters. That's when I bought or had access to anything I wanted. But I recognized that I've got these trophies, but I don't feel fulfilled. And I didn't have a relationship to it. And I was like, You know, it's like you walk in my house, so you got Jacob Lawrence. I'm like, yeah, it's great, isn't it? You know, I don't have that connection. It was just more of a trophy. And then I met someone you would know. She owns a hotel line that you would know. And she said to me, yeah, I spend $2 million a year on contemporary art, and I have to meet the artists and I get to know them, and I buy the work wet off the wall. And I was like, interesting. And that pivoted me. I said, all right, I'm going to buy art that I get to meet the artists and I get to know. So several artists follow me on Instagram and I have a relationship with them and I buy their work. And now I only really buy art of living artists, contemporary artists. Typically, I have to meet them, not all the time, but majority of the time I have to meet you and I have to understand the story behind the object. I can't buy something I can't tell my daughter about. And then if my wife doesn't like it, that's a different story. I'll just tell her, don't worry about it, go buy some shoes. And we just figure it out. But my collection has evolved from buying trophies to actually supporting the artist. And that's how I got to meet Titus Gaffar. We're good friends, and I helped him with Next Haven. And, you know, just a thought partner around just growing his practice. Dred Scott. So I live in I'm the only black family in my neighborhood. And in 2020, with George Floyd, I broke out. A man was lynched by the police today. I got the biggest house in the neighborhood. I hung down my front door. And I felt as though that I needed to make a statement for my children. And my kids they applauded that action. So I got, my front door is a 15-foot tall front door. And I hung it up and I sat and I watched my neighbors walk by. And I was early, right? Because it was a global protest that started to grow, call it June, July, August. I hung it up in May. And it was a statement that I had to make. Now, had any of my neighbors had knocked on my door, I would have said, this is a copy of an object that sits in the Whitney Museum. This is an adaptation of a 1930 banner of a man was lynched today by the NAACP. And that, oh, by the way, I'm vice chairman of that museum down the road that you know about, and here's why I'm making that statement. No one knocked on my door to ask a question. They just peered and wondered. And they were fearful because, you know, we have a good neighborhood, but no one wanted to understand why. And for me, I think that's important. That's how you use art or objects to tell a story. So for me, I had to have the story. So pretty much anything that I acquire today, it's either something that resonates, something that fits into my particular canon, or something that I'm responding to because of just the construction of the work, the execution from an academic way, because now I can protect that, and the story that I'm weaving into my house. You walk into my front door in Pennsylvania, the first thing you see is a 5-foot sculpture by Artist Lane of a black dancer who she sculpted because she rented her house to this dancer, live person. She had an interracial marriage. Family did not approve. She went nutty, went to institutionalized, but she had a beautiful figure that artist had sculpted. And then you walk in, that's the first thing you see in my front door. You turn to the right, you see my Lee Smith. You see some other objects. You see my Norman Lewis's. And then you turn to the other side, you see Monica Awu from Micah, who was mentored by Amy Sherrill. And then you see, it keeps moving around, Wiffle Wiffle was there. But you get an idea of whose house you're in. Mm-hmm. And then you get to illustrate particularly maybe why you're invited in, to be educated about what. So that's how I use it, and that's the history from buying masters to being supportive of artists to now filling the gaps to growing collection around a particular narrative. A lot of it's now Philadelphia Black artists. And I got a list that I'm trying to fill in, and then loaning that entire body out based on requests for shows or publications or conversations.
Yeah. You mentioned that your children were excited about the stand that you take with placing this object in front of the house. How are there other examples that you've seen that have a direct impact on them? Any of your works that's in the house?
Yeah, I think particularly, so Miles went to Hampton, so he's culturally aware, and I think he has a deeper relationship to the object we have in our house. My daughter, totally different person, USC, and she's a scientist, off to the races, doing her thing. And she responds in a different way. But I think together, I think they play off one another. They're twins, so I think they understand it. But Miles in particular, I think, has resonated more around just the question of why.
Got you. I got this little statement I want to read. I don't want to get it wrong. So there are a lot of moving parts and multiple markets in the art world. We have a changed landscape with the advent of the auction houses selling more contemporary art over time, more museums and collectors seeking out the hot commodity of Black art and art from the diaspora, new galleries and art advisors that have jumped into the fold, the rise of art fairs and social media, and more art than ever in the marketplace. My question is, with that being said, what do you see as the state of art from your vantage point?
It's interesting. That's a multi-layered question, and I'll be succinct with an answer. I think money's chasing money, number one, and that's a problem. I think Black galleries are being edged out to other galleries, I won't use terms, to other galleries, and artists are picking venues where they can maximize the returns of their talent. Look, it's a free market, I don't blame them. But I think that those who were in the trenches before Black art got hot are being edged out because of cream scraping, where the top 10% you go to, the large institutions with global distribution, and yet the Black galleries are being edged out and not being patronized. And so I see an art market on the verge of breaking. I think that everyone's talking about African art. Like, I wired money to, I'll tell you sort of quick. So I was on Instagram, and Swiss Beats put up something. I was like, what is that? And I called Richard Beavers. He was like, just call the guy in Uganda and see if you can get an object. So I give this guy from Uganda a tour of my home. He goes, okay, I'll give you one. He was like, wire me $10,000 to Uganda. I'm like, I gotta wire $10,000 to Uganda. Chase Bank called me 3 times. Are you sure? I was like, yeah, let it go. And it showed up. And now this object is, the artist itself, negative space, white background, Black figures, just off to the races. But my concern is that because of cream scraping and because of artists coalescing around Gagosian and Pace and all those other galleries, they weren't really there in the beginning for those artists. And so you have like this layer of galleries doing the hard work, and then they pop out because now their work is now fetching $100,000, going to 200, and that the market is just chasing because it's going up. It's not really committed to the story. So I'm concerned around the viability from a price perspective of some of the work that's being sold. And then I question myself, I mean, how many times can you write a $40,000 check? Now, I know you got work for $40,000 over there. I'm not hating on you. But I'm saying, if you can get it, go for it. Rock it out. But I'm concerned, if I'm going to pay $40,000, the price of a car, can I turn around and sell it right away? And the answer is probably no. And so I'm worried about the volatility. Now, this is me talking Wall Street, the volatility of prices. And I think prices are spiking because there's lots of demand there. But I'm concerned 5 years from now. And then we've seen, and Kent and I are in this art group, and we've seen how the games are played. Like galleries will sell to themselves, create fake prices, get the price up, sold, we talking Wall Street, sold to you, and you turn around and there's nothing in the layers to support those prices. And we see this occurring, and there are others that are more in tune to the prices, because I don't pay attention as detailed as I should. And I'm concerned that where work is pricing and trading, 5 years from now, a lot of these artists can't support that work, and it's doing a disservice to their practice, where their practice won't recover because now there's mark-to-market prices of where things were trading in the past, and now it's trading at half of what it traded a year ago, and then their price history is broken. So that is a more academic explanation, and I talk Wall Street all the time, but that's a detailed explanation where I think that the market is bifurcating itself, and newer artists can't break in, and that the more established artists, they get left behind because the market just starts to go sideways a little bit.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you, what I just said?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I kind of wonder if I may have had some opposing experiences, because I remember going to Art Basel, and I was walking in a series of booths, and I stopped at this one booth, and I'm like, well, you know, who do you bring in up next? Like, who's the next artist that you bring in? And he said, well, I got this, you know, this artist that's coming out of school. And I said, well, what's the price point? He said, well, I'm going to introduce him in between 20 and 40. And I'm like, how in the hell do you introduce this kid right out of college at 20 and 40,000? I mean, career artists, you know, 10, 20, 30 years in the game. That's not getting that on a regular basis. And so I think the price structures, I think it's all problematic, even in all aspects of the field, because I've seen auction houses have auctions going where I know people are not bidding, but the price still goes up. So like, it's like you still have to buyer beware. You know, there's a lot of money derived in this game. It's a transfer of wealth. I think it's important working with galleries that you trust and working with the artists. You mentioned a lot of people have come in since you mentioned earlier of some of the galleries that you work with. If you can mention them again, Richard Beavers, Mertiz, and also Baya. And we've introduced artists that have also gone on. You mentioned the Yale group. Khalif Thompson is an artist that we represented for 2 years. I wrote his letter of recommendation. Now he's at Yale. So Baya's had a history of having our own program. And I believe in Richard. I believe in Mertiz. Those are great gallerists. They've done tremendous jobs for their artists. I mean, Alfred Conte's in the house. What's up, Alfred? Yeah. If you don't have an Alfred Conte, hey.
I have one.
I got 3.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. You keep on rocking.
Right.
But you say, so there are more galleries that are run by people of color than just those 3.
Sure.
What I would advocate, one, obviously, everyone's here because you have an interest in visual arts. And that's great. I think that spending the time for a deeper relationship with scholarship to examine what appeals to you and why does it appeal to you. And then spending time at different art circles, educating yourself on just what's happening in the field, and then particularly the mediums that are occurring, and then actually talking to the artist about not only what you mean, but how it's constructed and why. Like Alfred, when I bought an object, I said, "Man, what's this brown stuff?" And he was like, "It's canvas," and it was like, was it cocoa or something? It was other like pigments that blend into it, and then he had a painting on top of it. And I was like, this is really interesting. I haven't seen the technique before. And then my mistake with Alfred Conte, I didn't buy big enough. You know, I bought, he said, well, you can still talk to me if you want. But I think you're outside my range. But, you know, and I'll give you one more. I'm full of stories. I live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, a mile from Washington Crossing, where General Washington crosses Delaware, right, historic area. And then 7 miles down the road is a town called New Hope, very artsy, and there is a gallery, an auction house called RegoArts.com. And I went there to go buy an object under fair value. I bought it, but I was like, "What's that?" And it was a wood object. It was a table, and he goes, "That's a George Nakashima." And I said, "What the hell is that?" That's where I recognized that my aesthetic has become narrow, and it was like a wake up call to me. It's like I'm missing everything else. And so if you appreciate visual arts, you'll understand what brings you in, but now you got to spend time of understanding the entire field and technique and quality and just all the things that go into it, and then you'll start identifying beautiful objects, period. Taking out the trash, looking at the trees lit up, a poem comes into your mind, because I have a relationship. That happened 2 weeks ago when I was taking the trash out on the eve of my Angela's birthday, and she wrote a poem around spring, and I attached it to that photo because my aesthetic is alive, and I feel as though that it's expanding, and it's not just towards power of the people. And I think a lot of the Black art is around social justice, and we're so much more than just that. And I feel as though that we're missing it from the canon of everything else that we do as a people.
Yeah. We're going to get into some Q&A here shortly. Before we do that, I just want to acknowledge just a few people. There are a number of artists in the house. If you're an artist, raise your hand. Glad y'all are here. There's a couple that I just want to give a special shout out to because they mean a lot to us and a lot to buy-in. I want to say that y'all been part of the fam for a long time. We first collected our first Alfred from a Visca gallery in 2008, something like that. We got 3 now. 2 are life size. I've actually lent both of them out to institutional shows. I got to mention my man Jamal. We have several Jamal Barbers in the house. Congratulations to him on all his success. If you're not following Studio Noise Podcast, you need to tune in to that. Baye is proud to underwrite Studio Noise for this year. And I got to mention, while I don't have his piece in our collection, I do admire this brother so much, and he's in the house, the master Freddie Styles. Freddie Styles, right? You got to give Freddie Styles his due. If you're not familiar with his work, please investigate it and support what he has and what he does. And there are many others, and I just want to thank y'all for being here and continue the journey. Before we get into the Q&A, think about what questions you've got. I want to talk to Reggie about there's a difference between collecting and there's a difference between being a patron, right? Many of us, we collect, we want to get that object and this and that, but can you talk just briefly about why it's important to be patrons of what we love so much and how we can support?
When there's opportunities for a gallery to be included in biennium, or an artist to be included and go in residency, but they're short funds, I think supporting those endeavors to make sure that we are there, that's patronage. You're just supporting what you believe and what you have a deep belief in. And then when you're patronizing an artist, in particular, you're interested in the entire career. You're interested in the person. Hey man, how you doing? And you'll be amazed what is behind I'm just okay. And so peering into the person, and I do that quite a bit, and then asking questions around the career where it's a relationship. If you're just collecting, you go, you buy it, you walk out, you're done with it, you don't care. And then if you're just collecting a number of things on the walls, okay, that's great, but you won't have an emotional attachment most likely. And so I think that there's a difference. If you're just, look, men hunt and gather. If you look at, and a friend of mine told me this, the majority of successful collectors are men because they hunt and gather. It's innate, who knows? And some may refute that, we can debate, I love debating. If you're just hunting and gathering and filling a storehouse with objects, that's great. But if you're deeply committed and you're looking to see the longevity of an artist or making sure that the gallery is here in perpetuity, then it's a different relationship. It's the different tracks. And I think from the perspective of, it's important that professionals who are trying to make a difference, creating a market, creating opportunity, creating access, placing artists in institutional museums, it's important to patronize. Najee asked me to come, and I said, I didn't hesitate. I said, I'll come, just gotta feed me. And then from the perspective of, if I didn't have a relationship with him, this wouldn't happen. And anything I said today to you, if it was beneficial, great. If you want to take 90% of what I said and say it's hyperbole and it's trash, okay. I had an opportunity to come hang out with my man. But I think where I'm sitting, I have the ability to affect change in every room that I exist, all right? And those rooms are varied. And then I was at a dinner in San Francisco, Creative Capital, all right? I'm chair of the board. Creative Capital has given $25 million away to artists over the last 24 years, and I'm the board chair as a year ago. And I sit in front of an artist in San Francisco, and she's in her 50s with a 13-year-old, and I mentioned 529. She goes, what's that? That's baffling. I was at TED in 2017, and TED, the big conference, and someone was marveling at, hey, you bought a house, how'd you do that? And so I want to press financial literacy in every room that I'm in. And one of the things, the Federal Bank of Boston wrote a report, I don't know, about 10 years ago, and said that, and this report was biased, was a great headline. It said the average net worth of a black household in Boston, $8, going to zero. Their sample size was small. That's how they got it. But it was a good headline because it's telling a story. And so when I walk into folks, whether it's talking art, travel, food, or finances, I want to press and share. And when I get into the art world and I talk to artists, I'm uniquely rooting for them, particularly those that I care about, and I want to see them win. And when I see them mismanaging taxes, like, dude, you got to put half away and wait for April 15th, or pay your quarterlies. They're like, what are you talking about? I want to be helpful in that perspective. And then when I get into institutions, and now I deploy game theory and talk about, you just sit in the water, you're not doing anything, you got to move faster, you got to think differently. I want to be helpful. And so I think that's what we all can do. We bring a unique perspective. Someone told me, a good friend of mine, a woman, she says, we get called in when everything's broken and they need us to put it back together. And that's really the truth. We get called in when things are broken. And we have a unique perspective. We have a unique work history where hard work is not unique to our community. And we need to be present. And when you're present, you have a voice, things get better at a faster rate. So I implore you not just be a person in a chair thinking about which object you're going to buy from Najee today, but how can you get involved at the high? How can you participate at Spelman? How can you participate in any room that you participate in, but be a voice? And sometimes it's writing a $5,000 check to say, I'm here. And then once that check is cashed, say, I got to tell you something. Now they're listening because you participated in their financial well-being. And that's how it starts. And so for everything I've been involved in for the last 20 years, and I stopped volunteering because I become leader of. And I'm getting tired of being leader of. I don't need time for it. It's important that we do it. And it's important that things you collect tells a story, tells you who you are, tells you the sanctity and the domain of your home. And that if you have children or grandchildren, you're telling them about their future based on what they see visually. And that if there's an artist sitting in here, particularly artists in the past, and they haven't gotten their fruits of their labor and their recognition, helping them get recognized. So their commercial work is not rewarded when they're in heaven. Because ultimately, a lot of times, it happens after they have died. And then scarcity is now in place. And now some gallery figures it out, gets all the work, writes a book, and off to the races. I've seen it time and time again. I can give you names where the person's dead, now the work is $1 million.
Control. Before we get into the Q&A, any recent acquisitions you want to talk about or point out?
Recent stuff? I don't know. I mean, there's a list. Oh, you talking about what's behind you? He wants me to plug what's behind you. It's a shameless plug.
Yeah,
So I'll tell you, past performance is not indicative of future performance. So anything you buy today is not about the future, it's about right now. So Najee called me up and said, you know, I have someone hot and someone that I think will have interesting career based on the work. He showed me a picture, and I said, I'll take 2. And they'll go to my home in Martha's Vineyard, where I have summer activities. And then invariably those who get invited in get drawn in based on the conversation I have on my walls, and I tell the story. And then the vineyard, why there? That's where every black person should show up eventually and have a relationship. You haven't been? I'll give you the name of a realtor. You can call them and make their appointment now for next year. It's too late for this year. And it's a way to press scholarship and to tell a story, and invariably, if someone's culturally aware, and most times most are, it deepens the relationship around table fellowship. And you've created a beautiful home or a beautiful atmosphere that will ultimately bring joy. It'll lower other things that are potentially harmful and bring up the things that are happy. So this African artist, I was drawn in by the technique. So the one I have is this teddy bear one. I said, I'll take the teddy bear one because it spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And I felt as though that the depth of work and then there's some negative tones there. And then also I've moved away from buying figurative. I'm pretty much either abstract or figurative abstract these days. It's somewhat of a departure of my current course, but I trust Najee when he's guiding me around just how I should think, because he's been more right and less wrong. And when he's less wrong, it means I'm not losing money, because I think about returns upon returns, and also think about just assurability. I got to insure it, there's a price to it, and then ultimately, it'll get passed down to my children.
Before we get into Q&A, I just want to mention, I think I sold you a Gerald Lavelle for $5,000 a few years ago, and last time I saw him at Basel, he was selling for over $50,000. So we got it right a few times.
So what is interesting about Gerald Lavelle, first of all, you never talk about your losses. You only talk about your wins. Right? No one talks about I lost, I did a mistake.
I told you about the one from Richard.
You know, remember,
Nathaniel.
Remember, I'm a warrior in the securities market. Trust me. I survived this market for 36 years. What was interesting about Gerald Lavelle is a Netflix movie we really love. He's a feature artist, and it's still up on Netflix. You can get it. And for me, anytime I see an object I own or an artist, and I see it in print or media or something like that, I get really fascinated and that's me too. You know, and so there's an element of being boastful. You know, I've been accused of other words that are not so good, but you know, it's like I got a relationship and I was right too. And so with Gerald seeing the movie Really Love and demonstrating a Black couple in their demonstration of romance around art. So for me, either art and food or art and music. Those are my two. And then I travel around the world for work. This past week I was in Houston, I was in New York, I think I was in Cincinnati, all in the last 7 days. And anyone who travels with me, who works for me, they get taken to museums around the world. And so they know that if you're traveling with me, invariably will end up at some museum in some place. And so I've introduced the art world to people who work for me, and we've ended up in some incredible places. And I'll end by saying this: not all visual art museums. One of the most impactful places I've been was in Lithuania. I went to a Holocaust prison that was closed in 1980. And the depth of human torture and the scholarship around there, you know, I drew my sensibilities around understanding the message they were trying to display. It was just horrifying. Or conversely, my favorite museum is Museum d'Orsay, 5th floor, with his mother, the clock, and then I'm there like once every 18 months, and I go there because I really love that museum and what they do. And then invariably, when I turn a corner and I see something, I go, and then I ask the question, can I buy it? And then they're talking about, well, it's X. And I said, I'll just watch it from afar and buy a book. So that's where we're at. Listen, I appreciate the opportunity to share my journey in the art community. It's fascinating. I've met some wonderful people. I've been in the homes of people you would know that are famous families that we have a common connection called art. And we just talk about art, you know, and we share the list. And it's amazing when you're accomplished because you can afford it, no matter what scale you're on, and you have that common connection. And that's what it's allowed me to do, is creating a common bond with art enthusiasts. No matter what you look like, who you are, or the depth of your wallet, we have something to talk about, we have something to share. And it's been fascinating to meet some of the world's famous families around art, and then having this common bond. And then if you're an artist I haven't talked to you, and I don't know you, show me your IG or show me your portfolio, we can talk. And take it from there. So I said enough. So thank you very much. Love to be here. Can't wait for the dinner tonight. Better be good. And any questions?
Yes. Natasha.
Have you documented your collection yet? Do you have a book?
I'm being asked to do that. I don't think I have enough for that. You know, it's just not time for that yet. You know, I'm thinking about that. She asked me, I'm going to document it. The answer is, I may do something around art, my career, my story, and tie them all together, because it's all part of it, but not necessarily a collection book. And then I don't feel as though that I'm old enough yet. You know, it's like you gotta be pushing like, you know, a certain number, and I'm not. I'm going reverse. You know, I'm getting younger, not older. So.
Better to tell those stories than you.
Oh no, they'll get documented in my words, just not right now. Yeah.
In the back.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. You have used the term several times, scholarship. What does that mean with the artist and the art? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah. So when I went to Spelman today, in my car, I bought 2 of their books for $50 each. And in that book, it is all the objects that is in that show is now documented. And so what's important is that you need curators who are generally prolific writers to put objects into written format so that it's preserved for the future. So scholarship is writing on the work, creating a narrative, and then collecting a body of work so that if there is a retrospective or a catalogue raisonné, that you have every piece of work that was executed by this one artist because it's been documented in books, and we can go back and say this is the artist's career for the last 50 years, and then now there's a physical record. One of the things that is problematic for most Black artists is that their papers, their personal papers, are not organized. And so when they go to heaven and it's time to go dig through and figure out who they were, it can't be found in order to write that narrative. And then when that narrative is not written, now you don't have a body of work to say this is who that person was. And so you're losing something from the artist's practice. So scholarship is what's the object, what's the story behind it, what's the history, what's the provenance, who owned it, where has it been? And then once there is a deep body of information, the value of the work can be assessed and then studied from a scholarly perspective. What period did they live in? How did they respond to that period? How did the period respond to them? And then what component? So Ed Clark, for example. I met Ed Clark. So anyone owns Ed Clark work in here? Yeah. Here's a story. I was a friend of mine took me to his flat in New York. It was on 23rd Street, and it was with my friend Gail. And he separated me and Gail. He got Gail in the back room, and he started sweet talking me to write a $30,000 check. So I was like, yeah, I wrote it because I really wanted Ed Clark. And I told Gail what I spent. She's like, you paid too much, fool. Go back and renegotiate. Wrong move. I went back, renegotiate. He was furious that I tried to renegotiate the price. This is me, right? I gotta get the lowest price, right? And he made me stand at the door. He gave me like literally a minute to pick something from the door and threw me out. Rightfully so. I shouldn't have did that. I made a mistake, but I was prompted by Gail. So it's really her fault. And if you ever wanted to collect an object by Ed Clark, you go with a woman. Ed loved women. So if you wanted a good price, you take a pretty woman with you, let her do the talking, and then you transact based on what she negotiates, and you leave. And my mistake with Ed, I tried to negotiate, I was by myself, I had the right woman. I was by myself, and I didn't buy enough. But I was fascinated by his work. And the object I have, I think it's 4 feet by 6 feet or something like that. And I paid $30,000 for it, and you can probably guess the price today. But it's not really about the price. I've always displayed it. It's in my home. It's something that will never be taken down, and it will always be displayed prominently where it's at. And I can tell a story, and that story is pretty good. Especially when I start drinking wine and the story starts to grow even further. And, it's just like, it is what it is, And I get some of my frat brothers around and we talk stuff. There's another question someplace.
Oh, yeah, we got a few other questions. John.
Hi, I'm John. My image important to you. Well, first of all, I'm not an arbiter of someone's work. I can enjoy it or not, or question it or not, or buy it or not, right? So art is personal, and everyone has a story. I just think that there is, if you look at most museum shows from Black art, it's always around the 68 period or the civil rights period, or weaving around that. And even So look, artist captures the time in which they're making art, and through the artist lens captures the society at that particular time. That's why it's so important to have artists. And that's one of the reasons why I got behind Creative Capital, but also Silver Arts Residency. I'm in the exec committee. I'm helping the Silversteins grow their art residency and making sure that artists get placed there that need to be there. And so when I just feel as though that a lot of our black artists get pigeonholed around the civil rights thematic stuff and not necessarily capturing the beauty of a horse or the beauty of an orange. And then it comes down to commercial viability. Artists are going to not only, they're going to capture what they want to capture, but in the back of their minds, like, well, this canvas cost me $45, this frame, this wood frame is $500, and my time to make it's going to be X. And so they got to feed and eat and pay bills, and they're going to think about that too, about what gets produced. And I think Instagram and other social media platforms has done more harm than good, where artists are now not sampling, but their thoughts get curated by what they see on the common platforms. And then someone told me last night, a curator, says, you know what, you only see vertical works, never horizontal works. Why? Because Instagram doesn't capture long objects. I never thought about that before. And so young artists are just now, their mindset is saying, I gotta do something like this. And so that's pigeonholing. So this is only one man's opinion, right? And then I'm gonna be a juror for a museum show. I'll be judging, I'll be a sole juror. I get to choose next month, no, June. And I'm thinking my approach so that I don't walk in with a bias. And so the work I do, I think about bias. I think about how not to be anchored. If I'm making prices in the stock market, I got to think about all the information in at that right time and not being anchored in a wrong way. So I think some black artists get anchored based on what the market is telling them what to make.
What I'm saying is, besides the artist, taking the artist out of you personally,
Yep.
placing the art,
Yep.
what makes it important to you?
It's my initial feeling first. Secondarily, it's the story behind it. It's feeling first. It's feeling gut. I have a good gut where I like the things I buy. And then I go down a list of train or not train, what school, if so. Then I go down to other metrics such as who's marketing, and then what is the artist trying to do as a person. So all those are in. But initially, it's my initial reaction. I know right away if I'm buying it. And then the second thing, after I figure out price, if I'm gonna do it or not. And a lot of times I don't. Because I'm like, again, I get sensible. It's like, there's only so many 30,000 checks you can cut. And so there seems to be a mean number where work start at 25 or 30, but yet the artist is still brand new. Can't support that. So it's really feeling first.
No. Others?
What is your feeling about photography?
Yeah, Deb Willis, Latoya Ruben Frazier, all friends. I only have one photograph in my collection. Me personally, I just don't know how to value a photograph. And the photograph I do have is of Senator Obama when he was campaigning in Philadelphia in front of the Independence Hall. And prominently, it's in my hall as you walk in my front door. It hasn't moved since then.
Collection you might be interested in. I have photographed. I've been a photographer for 50 years. I started in the early 70s. I'm 75. I photographed Betty Starr,
Oh, wow.
Ross White, Raymond Saunders, Fred Eversley,
Sure.
and about 4 or 5 others. I was the photographer who photographed Ernie Barnes' original artwork.
Sure.
that he decided to make his remember when he did the lithograph portfolio? So I got a story.
All right, I have a card for you after this. What's that? What'd you say? You guys stay on the line, Kent.
Right. Ready?
I was going to ask a question, but your Ed Clark story reminded me of an experience where a collector came to my home and I put him out and I said, "You love art, but you obviously hate artists."
Yeah.
And in many instances, we artists deal with collectors who come and treat us like shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, that just struck a nerve with me. And I no longer entertain clients because sometimes they come and they fill me with goodies that I have to take 2 or 3 days to wash off. So I just don't want to subject myself to that anymore. It means that maybe I don't make as many sales as I could, but I'm willing to do that not to kind of deal with what some collectors do. And your Ed Clark story just kind of struck a nerve with me.
Well, I can tell you this, and this is how who I am today is not who I was yesterday, number one. And, for me, a lot of firsts in things I do. And in order to allow me to do the things I do in the worlds that I occupy, there's a fair amount of ego that goes into place. And I can tell you that, it's just the way it is. And I realize that if I like a object from an artist, and if I get down to price, I'm not committal until I understand the entire picture. And if it's a price that I can't rationalize, I don't negotiate it. Literally, I stop talking. I've learned how to do that. There's an artist that I would love to have. He just recently got represented by a gallery, and the prices have adjusted appropriately because of that. And I just haven't gone through because I just can't rationalize what they're asking. So I think it's important that collectors have access to you. I got a feeling, did you make a work, Pine Needles?
Yes.
Yeah, I know you. So, yeah, I know you. I know of your work. The first time you and I are meeting. So let me clean that statement up. I think that it's important that collectors be respectful because artists, this is their career, and this is how artists sustain their lives and do the things they have to do. My story with Mo Brooker, I brought it from Sandy Webster Gallery. Sandy was a white woman married to James Brant, who's still living, and she, in Philadelphia, she promoted black artists exclusively. And when I walked in specifically to buy a Mo Brooker. It was $35,000. And he said, he knew I was buying it, and he sent a word by saying, "Thank you, because I just paid for my daughter's tuition at Spelman." First I said, well, damn, I paid too much. But again, who I was before is not who I am today. And I think that collectors need to be respectful of an artist's practice and what they're trying to deliver in the marketplace. And that little Kirk statement I just made is illustrating the hunter and gatherer that we tend to play when trying to acquire objects. But if there's a transaction, it's a two-sided. It's a fair price where buyer and seller meet, the markets are fair, and everyone comes out with something on both sides of the equation. That is the value. So I would not necessarily limit yourself to collectors based on inexperience or rude behavior. I think the opportunity to educate a collector or someone of who you are and why the object was being illustrated and that who you are as a person goes a long way in that conversation. And I first ran across, I'm trying to think, There is, what's her name? Is a professor at University of Georgia who is an artist.
Stephanie Jackson.
Stephanie Jackson, yes. And I think she mentioned your name to me. And then I saw your work, wasn't at Swan, but it was some gallery. And then I recognized you with pine needles, and I've always stuck with me. And for some reason, it didn't go forward. Maybe I was just passing through. I wasn't in a buying mode. But don't limit yourself, please.
Well, the question I was going to ask you is, it was like a two-part question. Is all of the work you own hanging in one of your residences, and did you visit Clark Atlanta University Museum when you went to Spelman?
Everything is hung. The reason why, my wife is a cardiologist and she runs a practice on Martha's Vineyard. And so I go back and forth to make sure she's happy that I'm going back and forth. And so I've worked there because it's a summer place, primarily to host folks. I was a full-time home. So yes, everything we own is up. What is up tells a story around who we are as a family. And I had a close relationship with Clark Atlanta, where I hosted all the land in my backyard a couple of years ago for a former president of Clark Atlanta, and had a wonderful experience meeting Atlanta luminaries. Very impactful to me, particularly Ambassador Andrew Young, who talked about the airport here, how it created 50 billion economic opportunity, and then a lot of opportunity for people of color, and then talked to me about the value of owning the conversation, his words. But no, it's the first time that I stepped foot on Spelman's campus, even though I've heard about it. I just never got to Morehouse Spelman or Clark Atlanta. And in seeing it where I parked today, I said, oh, that's Clark Atlanta, this is Spelman. I need to come back and do a proper tour. Because when I'm here, it's in and out, or having dinner, or business related, and I'm just running all the time. Never have time.
Last question.
Last two questions.
Last two questions.
I found the conversation very interesting. I'm a Philadelphian. I also am a Spelman alum and an artist as well. And I'm just happy to be visiting here. And Najee told me you were speaking. Hopefully I'm able to articulate everything that's in my head. I heard you talk about the state of Black art at this time, and it didn't seem like it was sustainable in terms of income for artists. But you kept referencing your career, the stock broker. Are you familiar with, or have you ever considered some type of financial literacy program for artists in terms of taking the income that they get and investing it so it does grow? Because as you mentioned, this is a career for them. And, as a career, what kinds of frameworks, if you will, that can be built so that they can pay their mortgage and send their children to college and buy groceries and travel and all the things that you like to do at whatever level they so choose?
Creative Capital Foundation. That's what that organization does. That's why I chose to participate in the leadership of the organization. They have a strong professional practice development program where they talk about the legal aspects, the taxation aspects, and the personal delivery aspects to financial literacy. No other place where I can affect change is by leading that. Because 75% of all the awardees are people of color. And so that's one way of feeding my desire to get to know the artist. Like, I do this because, remember, I started young in finance, and what you do is not who you are, and have all this in the background, and all this, a lot of it is art. It gives me an opportunity to develop into a whole person, to see it from different aspects. So yes, I do a lot of work through Creative Capital, and now participating more on Silver Arts. You can find them. It's a World Trade Center art residency program run by Silver Arts. Yeah, it was started by the grandson of Larry Silverstein, and they donated the entire floor of a World Trade Center floor, and they have 28 artists, and so I'm helping them take the next chapter. So everything I do is about creating capacity or building, and then uniquely, most of the things that I do, I ask the question, where are we? Because I'm not going to spend my time if we're not a part of it. And if I find that if I'm doing my resources or my talents or a combination of, and we're not there, then I make an immediate turn and I go out the door. Just like that. Unapologetic.
So before we take the last question, I just want to do one simple plug. Juneteenth weekend, we're celebrating 1 year at this location. And I'm calling for, appreciate it. I'm calling for what we're dubbing as the Black Arts Family Reunion. Artist Collective, let's get together. We're going to have a full weekend of programming. Maybe that could be a great time to partner with Creative Capital to create an opportunity for someone to come and represent and be present. Perhaps I'll talk with Reggie about that later. And then the last thing, my man got the food truck outside, gumbo and tacos. Holler at him when we get ready to, when we end this, I would like to kind of move and shift the chairs out. So if y'all could maybe just go visit the garden, go see him, and then give us like 5 minutes and come back. So with that being said, the final question.
Hold on a second. If you want to participate on any, on a nonprofit, come talk to me. I got slots at Creative Capital. I got you. Natasha called me on Instagram, so we need to talk. I need some help. I know exactly who you are. I need to be here. If you want to join a nonprofit board, it's a national board. Let's talk about that. If you want to navigate onto a museum board, I'll give you some tips about how to get recognized and have that conversation. I would, since you're in Atlanta, I would tell you talk to Kent Kelly and what's happening at the High and their event last night? Last night? Yeah, I had to go to New York, couldn't make it for that one. Right here, right here. They are looking to aggregate more people of color to come into their doors, to get more Black art on the walls, and to participate in the leadership of the organization. And they feel as though they don't have the community organized and such. I said, well, you got the D9, you got all the churches, and you got National Association of, there's a lot of them, and then we're organized in that fashion, just tell the story. So there are ways to participate. So, you can talk to me. Don't come to Philadelphia, stay right here in Atlanta, but come to New York for Creative Capital, we can talk.
Hey, and before we go to that one, Black Art in America has a foundation too. So talk to me about the Buy Your Foundation after this, but go ahead.
Well, I have found you absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Right.
I am a docent at the High, and I am learning so much about art. When I look at something, not that I have bought anything like this, I mean, I have prints in my home, but the conversation today, there's a local gallery, I live in McDonough, and I walked in and I saw a local artist, and I saw some art that I just like, but listening to your conversation is like, do you buy something because you just like it, and want to hang it on your wall, or is it you always have to calculate, because I never even thought about, is this artist this art that I looked at, this $800, which is a lot of money to me, what is your feeling about that? I mean, because you're coming from a financial, and I know this discussion was all about how do you purchase art, but for someone like me who is learning about art, and I like what I like, I'm learning that, there's a whole lot of scholarship behind it, because I'm learning how to look at art, and who's the artist, what period, what am I looking at, all of that. I'm learning that, but what about just people like me who just
the first 3 objects I bought, it was an artist called Andrew Turner out of Philadelphia. And and Mercer Red Cross, who owned October Gallery at the time, would host charity auctions at churches. And that's where I bought it. So I bought 3 paintings for $1,000. All 3 are hanging on my walls right now. So my response to you is not, like, if you're going to spend a sum of money, you're going to start thinking about the value of what you're about to buy. Questions come in. If you're buying objects because they respond to something that the period you're in, and you look at my collection, you can definitely see periods that I was in. For some reason, I was in a blue period. I was in a dark period. Maybe someone's going with me. It's like, that was what I was buying at the time. And then someone said, you have a red streak. I don't know why, and where the color red seems to come out for some time. And so what I would say to you is that don't let this highfalutin talk about all this money distract from your relationship to talk about who you are and what you want to demonstrate in your home and how that makes you complete and whole. Because you'll have a lot of people talking art, and all of a sudden they start throwing. The reason why I tell you numbers is to say, if you spend $19,000, it can turn into $319,000. But that's unique. You got to understand what the dealer's trying to do and who the artist is. And so this is part of your portfolio where when you pass on, they're going to divide up. All right, money, real estate, debt, other tangible things, and they're going to put a value on it, and they're going to tax it depending on how you're set up in your life. And if you need help setting up your estate, talk to Jonathan Parrish over here. He can hook you up, and he can help you. Literally, he can help you with setting you up to make sure that your financial life is in order, no matter where you're at. So the answer, because I travel, I have objects from around the world that respond to me at that particular moment, and I still have them, no matter what they cost. And you walk in, I can tell you a story. I just want to tell you a story. I want to share. And if you're in my home, I want to make sure that you're my guest, you're comfortable, I'm going to feed you. You can put your feet up, and I don't care about that, and I want you to have a good time. And so for art, for me, it's creating a beautiful environment that's relaxing, and that my guests, my home, can feel as though that they're around something that they can respond to, just like that. And I don't care who you are in life. I don't care what's in your pocket. If you're a good person, we can talk. And if you're a bad person, we disagree, you won't be that long. My wife will be praying for you. My wife's a minister and doctor. She'll be praying for you. She's married to a money-hungry Wall Street guy. And I think that it's about those environments, what's really important to me. And because of that, I'm getting that flexibility to offer that to my friends and to my guests. It's important that that is demonstrated. You can see who I am through the things that I have. I appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.